A storm raged over the shattered battlements of Eldenfort, the wind's mournful cry mingling with the groan of ancient stones. Night pressed close, thick with the scent of rain and iron, and each flash of lightning etched the ruins in stark silver relief. Lady Serilda moved through the chaos as a shadow among ghosts, her cloak sodden, her hands slick with more than rain, her heart pounding with secrets too heavy for words. She had spent her life in service to the crown, silent, dutiful, unseen. But that night, as thunder split the heavens and the old stones bled beneath her feet, her loyalty trembled on the edge of a blade. At the heart of the ruined courtyard, beneath the twisted limbs of the hanging yew, she found him, a stranger, collapsed against the ancient well, armor battered and glistening with blood. His tabard bore the crest of the house sworn to destroy her own, a black hound rampant on crimson, and yet his eyes, when they found hers in the flicker of lightning, were wide with something far older than hate. There was a plea in them that needed no words, a silent desperation that reached past every oath of fealty. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. She saw not an enemy, but a soul unraveling at the edge of death. And somewhere in the depths of her memory, a forbidden name stirred. The storm screamed, rattling the chapel doors behind her. Serilda's hands shook as she dragged the stranger's broken form from the open courtyard, every muscle burning with the weight of her choice. Mud sucked at her boots, rain turned the blood on his skin to pink rivers. She half-carried, half-dragged him beneath the arch of the chapel, where shadows pressed thick as velvet, and the scent of old incense clung to the stones. Lightning cast their silhouettes along the crumbling walls, two figures bound by fate's cruel design. She sealed the door with trembling fingers, heart hammering with the knowledge that every moment here was a betrayal. Within the sanctuary, silence fell as the storm raged outside. Serilda knelt beside the stranger, peeling away ruined armor, her breath catching as she revealed wounds, both fresh and old. Each scar was a story she dared not ask, each wince a memory of violence she had witnessed too many times. Yet as she worked, her hands steady despite the tremor in her soul, she noticed something. A sigil burned into the flesh above his heart, the mark of a prophecy whispered in the dark corridors of Eldenfort. For a heartbeat she hesitated, recalling the forbidden words her father had spoken on his deathbed. Protect the kingdom, no matter the cost. Never trust a prophecy, never trust the blood of your enemy. But in the flicker of a candle, the stranger's eyes found hers, and recognition flared. A memory buried beneath years of war and grief surfaced between them. She knew him, though not from the battlefield. Once long ago, beneath the summer boughs of the king's garden, a boy with storm-grey eyes had pressed a wildflower into her palm and whispered a promise shattered by the first arrow of war, yet never spoken of again. Now, here he lay, broken and hunted, and the memory of that oath burned brighter than the storm. If you were Serilda, would you risk everything for a secret that could destroy all you love? Would you betray your king, your blood, for the echo of a childhood promise? The answer shimmers in the space between thunderclaps, as fragile as hope. The stranger's breath rasped. He tried to rise, but she pressed him back gently, wrapping his wounds with torn strips of her own cloak. She could not let him die, not yet, not while the past still spoke through his pain. He watched her with wary gratitude, a tension thrumming in the air, as if a single word might shatter the fragile peace between them. The night deepened, and the storm's fury battered the chapel, but inside the air grew thick with something unspoken. Serilda's mind raced. How had he come here, across enemy lines, alone and wounded? Had he come for vengeance, or for something far more dangerous? She dared not ask, yet every glance was a question, every touch an answer she could not bear to name. She remembered the old songs, sung in the kitchens of Eldenfort, of lovers lost to war and found again in darkness. She remembered her father's voice, grave and cold. The heart is a traitor, trust only steel, protect the kingdom. But as she watched the stranger's chest rise and fall, the rhythm of his breathing matching the drumming of the rain, she felt the old certainty slip away. For the first time since childhood, she was afraid, not of death nor disgrace, but of the longing that bloomed in the silence between them. The hours crawled by, marked only by the flicker of candles and the distant shouts of search parties scouring the ruins. Serilda kept watch at the shattered window, her eyes searching the darkness for signs of pursuit. She knew the penalty for harboring an enemy, for breaking her silence. Yet she could not turn him away, not now, not after all she had lost. Outside, the castle grounds were alive with the ghosts of the fallen. Shadows flickered between the broken columns, and every echo of a distant footstep sent a tremor through her bones. She remembered the faces of friends lost to this endless war, the cold eyes of the king as he sent her on missions cloaked in secrecy. She remembered the warmth of a child's hand in hers, long ago, and the taste of honeyed bread beneath the yew trees. All of it felt impossibly distant, and yet it pressed close in the darkness, shaping every choice she made. As she returned to the stranger's side, Serilda found him awake, eyes bright with fever and fear. He struggled to speak, voice rough as gravel, and she listened, heart twisting as he revealed his name. Caelan. The name struck her like a blow, for it was the name woven into the old prophecy, the name whispered by her dying father in warning, the enemy heir, the harbinger of doom. Yet as Caelan spoke, the words tumbled from him, not as threats, but as confessions. He spoke of a vision, a prophecy that bound their two kingdoms in blood and fire. He spoke of oaths made and broken, of a secret that could end the war or doom them all. His voice trembled, not with hatred, but with longing, a longing for peace, for forgiveness, for the chance to rewrite the fate etched into their blood. Serilda listened, her heart a battlefield. She heard the truth in his voice, the echo of her own doubts. She remembered the oath she had sworn at her father's deathbed, to protect the kingdom at any cost. But what if the cost was her soul? What if the enemy before her was the only hope for peace? Outside, the storm began to break, the rain easing to a hush. Dawn pressed against the horizon, cold and grey. Within the chapel, Serilda's resolve wavered. She saw in Caelan not just an enemy, but a mirror, a soul marked by loss, by hope, by the unbearable weight of legacy. She saw the boy who had once promised her forever, and the man who now asked her to risk everything for a future neither dared imagine. In the trembling half-light, Serilda reached for Caelan's hand, her fingers brushing his with a hesitation that spoke volumes. The touch was brief, but it burned like fire. In that moment, 1,000 unspoken promises passed between them, words lost to the storm, but alive in every heartbeat. Would you, listener, dare to trust a hand once sworn against you, when every whisper in the darkness promises ruin, or would you choose silence and let hope wither behind the walls of duty? As the first light of day crept through the broken windows, Serilda knew the choice would haunt her forever. She would betray her king, her blood, for the chance to keep Caelan alive. She would risk the doom of her kingdom for a love that had never been allowed to bloom. The storm had passed, but inside the chapel a greater tempest raged, a storm of longing, of regret, of hope fragile as glass. And as Serilda watched over Caelan, her hands stained with the memory of every oath she had ever broken, she understood at last. Some secrets are worth the fall. Some loves are meant to be whispered in the dark, even as the world burns around them. If your heart were the last secret keeping a kingdom from ruin, would you dare to let it speak? Dawn splintered through the stained glass, painting fractured halos on the flagstones where Serilda knelt, breath shallow, beside the wounded heir. Caelan's sleep was restless, his brow furrowed by battles fought in both flesh and memory. Every tremor of his hand, every broken gasp, drew Serilda further from the fortress of duty she had spent a lifetime constructing. The chapel, Once a sanctuary for penance, now became a crucible for choices that would reshape the fates of kingdoms. Outside, Eldenfort still trembled from the siege's fury. The scent of char and blood clung to the stone, and the distant echo of booted feet warned of search parties combing the ruins. Serilda pressed a damp cloth to Caelan's fevered skin, her mind spinning with the weight of every secret she had buried beneath the ashes of loyalty. In his delirium he whispered names: a mother, a brother, a promise sworn on a riverbank beneath silver-leaved willows. Each word was a blade, carving through years of enmity and painting him not as an enemy, but as the boy she had once known. The memory rose, unbidden, children running through the wildflower meadows beyond the border, laughter echoing where now only the crows dared linger. She remembered a pact sealed with muddy hands, a vow that no war, no crown would ever sunder what their hearts had kindled in innocent defiance. But time had sharpened their world into edges, and the river they once crossed together now ran red with the blood of their kin. Serilda's fingers lingered on Caelan's, tracing the pale scar at his wrist, a token of that long-ago oath. In the hush, she found herself speaking, her voice barely more than a breath. She recounted the night the war began, how she had hidden beneath her father's cloak as the banners burned, how each death since had been a stone laid upon her soul. She wondered aloud if fate was nothing but a cruel game, binding hearts only to wrench them apart. Caelan's eyes fluttered open, pain and recognition mingling within their storm-grey depths. He tried to rise, but the wound at his side bled anew, dark and stubborn. Serilda steadied him, her touch gentle, yet trembling with all she dared not say. He told her then, with words heavy as iron, of the prophecy that haunted his every step, a vision of fire and ruin, kingdoms swallowed by silence, hope strangled by betrayal. He spoke of a secret kept at the heart of Eldenfort, a relic lost to time that could unite or destroy their broken lands. The air between them thickened, charged with the pull of memories and the threat of discovery. Footsteps neared the chapel doors, voices muffled yet urgent, searching for traitors in the shadows. Serilda gathered Caelan's shattered armor, hiding it beneath the altar, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of dread and longing. She dared to brush a strand of hair from his brow, the gesture lingering longer than necessity demanded. If the world outside was built upon lies and violence, here, for a fleeting moment, she allowed her truth to surface, a truth that tasted of fear and forbidden hope. The searchers passed, their torches flickering against the fractured glass, and silence returned, heavy and fragile. Serilda's mind raced with possibilities. If she signaled for help, Caelan would die, and the prophecy he carried would be lost. Or worse, fall into hands that would wield it as a weapon. If she aided his escape, she would forfeit all she had ever known, her title, her home, the trust of a king who had raised her in the ashes of his own children. Each path led to ruin, yet only one led to him. They spent the day cloaked in the hush of the ruined chapel, speaking in glances and half-formed confessions. Serilda cleaned his wounds with trembling hands, whispering lullabies from a language she had not dared remember. Caelan traced invisible patterns on her palm, a silent plea for forgiveness, or perhaps for courage. Outside, the world hung suspended on the cusp of war, but within these crumbling walls, time bent around them, holding fast to what might still be saved. As dusk bled into the chapel, Serilda heard the bells of Eldenfort toll, a signal sharp and insistent, summoning all loyal subjects to the keep. Her absence would soon be noticed. She pressed a bundle of bread and herbs into Caelan's hands, her gaze meeting his with an ache that bordered on desperation. He spoke her name, not as an accusation, but as a benediction, and she realized how much of herself she had lost in the service of kings and ghosts. An urgent banging at the distant gate jolted them both. Someone had seen movement near the chapel. Serilda's thoughts scrambled. She could not allow them to find him, not now, not when the prophecy remained unspoken and his life still flickered with possibility. She guided him toward a hidden stair, long forgotten by all but the oldest stewards, a passage carved in secret for moments such as these. The air in the corridor was thick with dust and memory. Every step away from the chapel was a step deeper into treason, yet her resolve only sharpened as the danger grew. They emerged beneath the tangled boughs of the ancient yew trees, the roots twisting around the stones of forgotten graves. Here, in the twilight, Serilda paused, torn between the urge to flee and the need to hold on to this last, precious moment. Caelan, pale but determined, reached for her hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes shone with a fierce, unspoken promise. The world beyond the trees was uncertain, a labyrinth of patrols, spies and shifting alliances. Serilda knew that to remain would mean certain death for them both, yet to run was to abandon all she had fought to protect. She pressed her forehead to Caelan's, the gesture fierce and intimate, a silent confession of all the words she could never speak. They stood thus, wrapped in the hush of dusk, the kingdom's fate balanced on the edge of an impossible choice. The bells pealed again, closer now, and Serilda drew a shaking breath. She whispered to Caelan of the safe path through the marshes, of the old mill, where loyal hands might shelter him until the storm passed. She told him of her fear, how it had shadowed her every step since the night their world was torn in two, how it had kept her silent when she should have screamed. He answered not with words, but with a tremulous touch to her cheek, a vow written in the salt of unshed tears. They moved together through the half-light, every heartbeat a countdown to discovery. The shadows pressed close, thick with the ghosts of those who had fallen for lesser causes. Serilda felt the weight of every promise she had ever made, to her father, to her king, to the child she had once been. Each oath was a shackle, yet in Caelan's presence they became wings, lifting her above the ruin of her own making. At the edge of the woods, they paused. Caelan looked back at the dying light spilling over Eldenfort, the fortress that had been both prison and sanctuary. He murmured of the future, the hope that one day the world might remember not only the wars, but the love that had flickered defiant in the heart of darkness. Serilda pressed a token into his hand, a ring wrought from the iron of the fallen gate, inscribed with a word only they would understand. It was all she had left to give, and it was everything. As Caelan slipped into the shadows, Serilda remained, her heart torn between relief and agony. Behind her, the bells tolled for traitors. Before her, the path vanished into the unknown. She turned back toward the keep, shoulders squared, face streaked with tears and rain, knowing the hour of reckoning had come. The kingdom's doom and its only hope lingered in the hush that followed, a secret too heavy for any one heart to bear. If your hands were stained with both loyalty and love, which would you wash away, knowing the world would judge you either way? Let your answer echo in the silence, for the darkest choices are those made when no one else is watching. She did not remember crossing the threshold back into the keep, only the sound of her own breath, ragged, desperate, scraping against the silence that had fallen as thick as the rain. The corridors of Eldenfort, once familiar, seemed now to twist and narrow, every torch guttering against the shadows that clung to her like regret. Serilda's footsteps echoed on the stone, each one a treacherous drumbeat, calling the hounds of suspicion. The iron taste of loss was sharp on her tongue. The memory of Caelan's trembling hand pressed to hers, already fading like a dream. She pressed her palm to her chest, as if she could hold his presence there a moment longer, as if she could keep her heart from fracturing beneath the weight of what she had done. The halls were not empty. Whispers wound through the tapestries, servants with downcast eyes, guards whose hands never strayed far from their hilts. The air was thick with secrets, and Serilda felt every gaze like a blade pressed to the nape of her neck. Somewhere above, the bells still tolled, slow and funereal, a dirge for the loyal and the lost alike. She remembered her childhood, racing down these corridors with laughter in her throat, before the world had become a chessboard, and she nothing but a piece to be moved, sacrificed, forgotten. Now, every step forward was a step deeper into a labyrinth of betrayal. In the council chamber, the king's men gathered, their voices a low murmur of accusation and unease. Lord Maelric, her father's oldest friend, fixed her with a gaze as cold and pitiless as the northern sea. The words he spoke were measured, but Serilda heard the question that trembled beneath. What price would she pay for her silence? What had she seen or hidden while the enemy air slipped through their grasp? She answered as she always had, with eyes lowered, voice steady, every syllable a shield. She told them she had seen nothing but ruin and bodies, that the storm had washed away all tracks, that her loyalty was as unbroken as the crown itself. But as she spoke, she felt the lie burn through her, leaving her hollow. She wondered if they saw the tremor in her hands, the falter in her breath. The hours bled together, a blur of questions and veiled threats. Outside, the storm relented, but within these walls the tempest only sharpened. Word spread swift as wildfire. A stranger had been seen, a shadow on the ramparts, a sigil glimpsed beneath a cloak. The old alliances, brittle as winter branches, began to splinter. Some whispered that Serilda herself was a traitor, that her father's blood had run thin in her veins. Others recalled the prophecy, spoken in hushed tones since the siege began, that when the silence broke, so too would the kingdom. She felt the ground shifting beneath her, the certainty of years dissolving into fear. Yet in the darkest hour, as night pressed close and the keep held its breath, Serilda found herself drawn to the chapel once more. The remnants of Caelan's presence lingered, an imprint in the dust, a drop of blood on the flagstones, the faintest trace of warmth in the air. She knelt in the shadows, her prayers silent, not to gods or spirits, but to the memory of a promise forged in innocence and broken in war. She remembered the night by the river, when two children had sworn to protect each other, no matter the cost. She remembered the way Caelan's eyes had found hers beneath the hood, haunted and hopeful all at once. And she remembered the vow she had made at her father's deathbed, to do what was right, not what was easy. Outside, the search intensified. Riders scoured the woods, torches blazing in the pre-dawn gloom. The people of Eldenfort huddled behind locked doors, their trust in their leaders crumbling with every rumor, every accusation. Serilda watched from the high window, her heart in her throat. She knew she could not remain a shadow forever. The moment of reckoning had come, and with it the choice she had feared above all, to betray the man she loved or the kingdom she had sworn to serve. At dawn, Lord Maelric summoned her. The council chamber was lit by a single candle, its flame dancing in the draught that crept beneath the door. The air was heavy with expectation, the taste of judgment sharp as steel. Maelric spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of the dangers that threatened their fragile peace. He demanded the truth, and Serilda saw in his eyes the reflection of all she stood to lose. She stood tall, her voice unwavering, as she denied any knowledge of the enemy prince's fate. Yet she saw the doubt settle like dust in the corners of the room. She knew then that her time was measured in heartbeats. As the sun crested the horizon, Serilda made her choice. She slipped from the keep, unseen but not unmarked, her cloak pulled tight against the morning chill. The path to the forest was treacherous, every branch and bramble seeming to conspire against her. She moved swift and silent, guided by memory and fear, until she reached the yew trees where she and Caelan had parted. There, in the hush of dawn, she found him waiting, his silhouette outlined in the pale gold light, his armor stripped away, the burden of royalty set aside, if only for this moment. No words passed between them. The silence was their confession, their plea, their farewell. Serilda reached for Caelan's hand, her fingers trembling as she pressed the iron token, a fragment of the fallen gate inscribed with their shared word, into his palm. He closed his hand around it, eyes shining with tears he did not shed. In the space between heartbeat and breath, they let go of all that could not be changed. The kingdom, the war, the dreams that had withered beneath duty's gaze. She traced the scars on his wrist, the mark of chains he had worn for her sake. He brushed a strand of rain-soaked hair from her face, his touch gentle as the first promise of spring. Together they stood beneath the ancient yews, roots tangled deep in earth, stained by centuries of blood and longing. Above them the crows called a warning, or perhaps a blessing. Serilda looked into Caelan's eyes and saw not an enemy nor a prince, but the boy who had once sworn to find her in the darkness. In that stolen moment, love and grief were one. Time pressed on. The sound of riders grew near, the kingdom reclaiming its own, the price of secrets closing in. Caelan pressed a kiss to her forehead, a benediction and a goodbye. Serilda stepped back, her heart a storm within her chest. She watched him vanish into the woods, his figure swallowed by mist and memory. She wanted to call out, to beg for one more hour, but she knew the cost. Some stories could only survive in silence. When she returned to the keep, the gates stood open, the banners torn. The council awaited her, judgment heavy in the air. They questioned her again, voices sharpened by suspicion and desperation. She bore their scrutiny with the calm of one who has lost everything. She could not give them what they wanted, nor could she offer absolution for the wounds they would never see. In the end, it was not accusation that undid her, but pity, a kindness she could not bear. They sent her away, her title stripped, her name spoken only in whispers. She left Eldenfort at dusk, the sky alight with the last embers of day. Behind her the kingdom endured, fractured but unbroken. Ahead the road wound into the unknown, bordered by shadows and the ghosts of all she had sacrificed. She carried with her the memory of a love forbidden, a secret kept at the edge of a blade, and the knowledge that sometimes survival demanded the greatest loss of all. Years would pass, stories would twist and fade, the truth buried beneath layers of rumor and fear. Yet in the villages at the edge of the wild, by firesides and in the hush before sleep, the tale of the silent lady and the fallen prince would be told. Some would say she betrayed her king for a lover. Others would whisper that she saved them all with a single act of mercy. But only Serilda and Caelan would ever know the cost, the ache that never healed, the promise that lingered like a ghost. So, if you find yourself standing at a crossroads, your hands stained with both loyalty and love, remember her. Remember that the darkest choices are made when no one else is watching, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let the world believe you are a villain, so that one soul you cherish may yet be free. In the silence that follows, let your answer echo. Would you choose love or duty, knowing the world would judge you either way? For in the end, kingdoms rise and fall, but the whispers of the fallen endure, haunting the stones and the heart alike. And as night creeps once more over Eldenfort's broken towers, a single word remains carved in iron: hope, hidden where only the lost dare seek it.